Welcome to Are You Ready to Garden? Hello, everyone. My name is Bill Lubick. I'm with Rutgers Cooperative Extension, Middlesex County. I am the agricultural agent for Middlesex County and a professor at Rutgers. Our team brings experts together from Rutgers University and the New Jersey Agricultural Experiment Station, as well as other horticultural experts throughout the state and local farmers willing to share their expertise with our listeners.
And as you know, the New Jersey Ag Experiment Station is an outreach arm of Rutgers, the state university. So our information is dispersed throughout the entire state of New Jersey, and we bring you experts like Dr. Joe Goffreda to help share their knowledge with all of our residents throughout the state of New Jersey. I would like to introduce tonight's speaker. Dr. Joe Goffreda is the director of the Rutgers Fruit and Ornamental Research Extension Center, and he was recently honored for breeding a hybrid peach, which has a combination of attributes attractive to commercial producers and consumers. It is resistant to some major diseases, particularly the bacterial spot. Now, the Rutgers Fruit and Ornamental Research Center in Cream Ridge, New Jersey, conducts and disperses research information on high quality trees and small fruits. We are very proud of the work that Dr. Joe Goffreda is doing for everyone in New Jersey and for the New Jersey Ag Experiment Station. And we're very fortunate to have him here tonight to share his expertise with all of you. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Joe Goffreda. Hey, Joe, thank you for joining us tonight.
Yeah, thank you for giving me the invitation to be here for the start of your new series. Today, I'm going to do is discuss about different ways in which you can prune your fruit trees. And pruning fruit trees is very important because you need to manage the size of the trees. You need to manage diseases within the trees. So we're going to talk about the different ways and different species of fruit trees grow and how we have to pick a pruning system that really works with the way that tree naturally grows. All right, so why is pruning important? For one thing, by pruning, you can control the shape and size of the tree. You don't want the trees to get taller, get over 10 feet tall because it's very difficult to manage. So pruning is a way of doing it. And you can control the shape of the tree. The object is to try and get the tree so that it can collect light very evenly. So you don't want to have the top of the tree shading the lower branches. If that happens, the fruit quality is not going to be very good on the lower branches. And pruning's used, you can develop the basic scaffold, the shape of the tree. Depending upon the system that you're going to use, you can go for different types of shapes. One of the things that you want to do is to select branches. Your main scaffold limbs are those main branches that come off the trunk of the tree. And it's best for those to have wide crotch angles, not very narrow, because when they're narrow, what happens is you get the bark will get into the tree and it winds up weakening the branch and it can fall off. The next thing is you go through it and remove your dead and diseased branches. And then you remove crossing branches to open up the canopy and reduce disease pressure. The other thing that pruning does is it maintains the vigor of the tree. It can help reduce the crop load. What happens with fruit trees is they'll tend to set heavy crops one year and lighter crops the next year because they had such a heavy crop the previous year. The object of the pruning is to try and maintain a level of fruit load so it's not overcropping each year. So these are some of the basic tools that you need for pruning the trees. The bypass pruner is very good for doing your tedious, more specific pruning of limbs. And then the loppers are taking off larger branches, and then the pruning saw is good when you have to take off, major limbs. All right, one thing, there are different types of cuts that you can make on the branches. A heading cut is when you cut off the top growth. And the reason you do heading cuts is to promote more branching. There's times when when the tree is younger, you want to induce branching so that you can select your scaffold limbs. So you may want to use a heading cut to promote branching. When you make these heading cuts, it's good to cut make the cut at an angle so that the bud that's going to be coming out will, if you cut it at this angle, this branch grows out this way, and that will callus over. You don't want to leave stubs when you're doing the heading cuts. And the reason when you remove the apical bud from a branch, what it does is it stops the flow of auxins from the main apical bud, which breaks. And when you remove that auxin going down to these other buds, the buds that are left down below it are now able to break. Previously, the auxin prevents those from breaking dormancy. So this promotes growth of those, and that's why you get a more bushy habit after you remove that apical bud. Now, another technique that could be used to promote a bud to break where you may need one, say you're trying to have more branch points so that you're getting your scaffold limbs later on. If you make a very slight cut in the cambium tissue, the bark, right above a bud, that again cuts off the flow of auxins to that bud. So without the auxins, that promotes development of that bud, and it can break and form a new branch. So this is a technique that's used in the nursery industry quite a bit to produce well-feathered or well-branched young trees that can be sold to fruit growers and to homeowners. So they have some scaffold limbs to start selecting when they first buy their trees. So this again shows you the proper pruning cut. Right here, it's cut on the angle, and that's what you'd want to do. But you can see how this cut edge is so close to where that vegetative bud is located. If you make it too close, that it's a high probability that the tissue around here may dry out. It may start to leaf out, but then it'll fail. So you wind up losing that bud, and the one maybe on this side would break later. This is a more proper cut to be made. It's more above where the bud is located. So this will heal over nicely. This one, they're leaving too much of a stem. This wood's going to die, and disease can come down into here, and then again cause that bud to fail. And over here, just making a straight end cut. Again, you're going to wind up having dead tissue here that's not able to heal over. So when you're making your cuts, you want to be sure to choose a bud that's pointing in the right direction, and then angle your cut slightly so it can heal over nicely. Now, thinning cuts is something that we're going to do quite a bit when the trees are getting older. Every year you need to make thinning cuts on the trees because after seasons of growth, the canopy gets way too dense, so it becomes difficult for the leaves to dry off after rain. And then the longer the leaves stay wet, the higher the probability is that diseases are going to come into the tree, or sometimes even into the foliage and sometimes even to the stems of the tree. So by making cuts here, you're going to thin this branch out. This would have been a very bushy branch if you left all of these branches in here. So you cut out some of these twigs here, not too close to the stem. You want to cut them just above the collar. And by doing this, you wind up getting, much less dense canopy. Okay, now here we're looking at an older tree. There's a couple terms I'd like to go over and what you want to do with it. First off here, these are what I'm referring to as scaffold limbs. These are the main branches of the tree. In this case, this particular scaffold's coming off at a nice wide angle. This is something that we like. It can support a lot of fruit. You don't get the bark inclusions in here, so that the branch is less likely to break off in the wind and that sort of thing. Over here, what are these vertical shoots? And the trees will tend to produce a lot of these vertical shoots each growing season. It's best to try and remove these even during the summer months before they get well established, because if you cut them off later, they're more likely to break new buds where you cut them off. But what happens is these shoots will try and grow up. They're very vigorous. They don't make any fruit. There's really no need for them in most cases, but as you'll see, like sometimes if you, like say the major branch here broke out, you lost your central leader, you may use a shoot over there to replace that broken leader that was there. So one of those suckers could be used to replace the leader. But otherwise, they're generally not useful. So these are, like I said, are what are called water sprouts or vertical shoots. Suckers, when you're getting fruit trees, oftentimes they're budded onto a rootstock. So when you get a branch coming up from underneath the soil line, typically that is just a bud that's broken from the rootstock. They're called suckers. One does not want to have suckers growing. They're not going to be the same variety. Again, it's best to try and remove them as early as possible so they don't continually grow back. Now over here on this branch, you have a very narrow crotch angle. So it's almost like a 45-degree or less crotch angle here. So here you're going to get the bark inclusions in there. So this becomes a very weak limb. When you look at like Caloriana pears, your ornamental pears, like Bradford pear, they tend to grow a lot of narrow crotch angle branches. And then when you get snow on them, or if it gets really windy, you tend to see these trees just split apart. We want to avoid that. So when we're pruning the tree, we're going to try and select branches that have wide crotch angles. And if they don't have them, we're going to try and train them to be wider. So that's very important to do, is to choose branches that are coming off on the right angle. And then you're going to also want to be doing what's called directional pruning, where you're trying to get the buds to break to head to where the light is. Again, we're trying to develop a tree framework that's going to capture the light. So you don't want branches growing into the canopy. They're not going to get any light there. You want to select for buds they're going to grow out into the sunlight. So you want to choose the right bud depending upon what direction you want it to grow. So you may remove this terminal bud if it's not growing in the right direction, and then choose one of these other buds beneath it to get the branch growing in the right direction. Now, as tree ages, sometimes you're going to have to remove some of the scaffold limbs. A lot of times what I do when we're training our trees is we may train them to have like 4 or 5 branches, knowing that some of the branches are likely to get a canker in them and we're going to be removing them at some point. But sometimes some varieties are very, are very vigorous and very strong trees, and you may wind up having 5 scaffold limbs that are all very healthy. So you're going to need to remove some of the scaffold limbs so that you get better air movement into the tree. When you're removing a large branch, it's important, there's an important sequence in which the way in which you make the cuts in that branch. The first cut that you need to make is a cut right over here, a little bit beyond where you want to make your where you're going to make your final cut. So you make a cut in there, and then you make another cut down here. The weight of that branch is going to come down, and you're going to get it breaking, maybe still be a little bit attached over here, and cut through that later. So once the weight of this big limb is taken off, and all that you have left on that tree is this section here, then you go with your chainsaw or handsaw, and then you make a cut above the collar, not really close to the trunk of the tree, but just beyond it. You'll notice where the branch is attached, there's like a little swelling there. So you want to make a cut there, straight cut like that, and then that will eventually heal over if you make a good cut. If you just tried to make this cut right away, what would happen is that branch would begin to break off, and it would wind up tearing the bark off from beneath the branch and cause a major problem on the trunk of that tree. So that's very critical to do. Whenever you remove, even on your ornamental trees, you always want to make sure to do your cuts of larger limbs like this. All right, now we're going to talk about the two different ways in which fruit trees can be trained. Now, fruit varieties, or fruit species, I should say, which have a very upright growth habit, are best trained to what's called a central leader system. And this is basically where you have one main trunk going up the center of the tree, and then you'll have a series of scaffold limbs spaced about 2 feet apart as you go up along the trunk of the tree. You keep the topmost scaffolds are going to be the shortest, and as you go down, they get progressively wider and wider. The reason for that is that you want to have the whole tree get a good level of sunlight. You don't want to have the top of the tree wider than the bottom of the tree, or it just shades out the lower branches. So it's basically trained something like a Christmas tree sort of thing. Some of this, again, you've got your root suckers. Here you've got a nice wide angle branch, which will make a good scaffold limb. You've got some water sprouts here. You're going to cut those off as soon as possible. In this branch, evidently, there was probably some fruit on it, and you get what's called a hanging branch. These are weak branches, which you want to cut off, and you want to rejuvenate it with new wood that you have here, which will bear your fruit for the next year. In this case, you want to make this branch out a bit. You can do a heading back cut here, and you'll get multiple branches coming closer to this main branch, and that way you don't have as much blind wood that's not going to be having any buds on it. So you do cuts like that. Over here, we have some fruiting spurs forming. Apple trees and pears will develop these fruiting spurs, short little branches, which tend to get flower buds on them. So you don't want to remove all the fruiting spurs. When the tree's young, you want to promote having fruiting spurs. As the tree gets older, though, you want to rejuvenate the spurs with younger ones. So right here is what's called our central leader, and these could be our first two scaffold limbs, and this could be forming another scaffold limb. Sometimes on apples, the terminal bud will be rounded and result in a flower cluster. An apple like Rome tends to set a lot of flower buds on its terminals. This bud right here, you'll notice how it's more triangulated. Those types of buds are vegetative buds. So they're not going to lead to fruit. Over here, we could see another rounded bud, which is a flower bud. And then this is what's called a spur, these little short branches, which will tend to set flower buds on them. And then right over here is what's called the bud scar. That marks the area where the initial bud had broken the previous year. So here we have a couple spurs. These branches here, this is like last year's branch. These look like they all have vegetative buds on it. Again, this would be a branch that grew last year. You could see the bud scar right there. And again, these buds here are basically vegetative buds. Now, when you go down to the previous season, so now we're into 2-year wood, we're seeing flower buds here and here. These are really important. You want to maintain your fruiting wood. You don't want to get rid of 2-year wood because that's where a lot of the crop is going to be. And you also don't want to get rid of the spurs again. Here again, we've got last year's growth, and these are all vegetative buds. And that terminal bud could have flower buds on it. So this is the basic anatomy of a central leader tree. And this is very simplified. It's kind of trade like a conifer. You've got your longer branches right here. So this is the first whorl of branches here and here. Then you'll have 2 feet in between them, and then your second whorl of branches right here and here. And then another 2 feet, maybe 18 inches or so right here and here. So that's your third whorl. And that's probably how tall as you want to have the tree. You figure you've got 2 feet here, 2 feet here, 2 feet here. We're up to 8 feet, and this, with this, it'll be like a total of 8 feet. So this is your central leader, and these are your scaffold limbs. What's pictured here are only 2 limbs. Typically, you would have 3 or 4 coming out. Going for, around the tree, arranged around the tree. So the first thing you're doing when you're approaching a tree that you want to prune is to look for any diseased or dead branches on the tree. You definitely want to remove them. And it's good to remove the things that you you're not going to need before you go on and choosing what other branches that you're going to leave. So after you get rid of that, the next thing you want to do is look for branches that are either crossing each other or are going to be growing into each other with time, and try to do some directional pruning with them if you can. And if there's no way of avoiding it, I'd recommend just removing one of the branches. And when you're selecting for your scaffolds, you're going to look for, like I said, 3 or 4 branches around the lower part of the tree, which are going to form your lower scaffold limbs. Ideally, they're going to have wide crotch angles. If they're young branches, you should be training your trees regularly each year. What you can do if the branch angle isn't really right, but the branch is in the right position, you could put weights on that branch, or some spreaders between the trunk of the tree and the branch, to try and train that branch to have a wider angle to it. That way, when it develops and you've got a large crop load on it, it can handle it. If you have a lot of growth on your central leader, like another 18, 24 inches or so, you could make a heading cut at that point to promote branch formation so that you can get your second tier of scaffold limbs.
Joe, what are some practical ways that people can spread the branches for homeowners?
Well, there's a lot of things you can do. You can try and tie the branch down and anchor it to the soil with a string, but it becomes a tripping hazard. You could just hang weights on the tree of some sort. I mean, some people just put cement in a cup and some sort of hanging mechanism, and then just hang that on the tree. Or you can buy in garden centers and stuff, they may have these spreaders that you could put in between the trees, or wooden sticks, or other sorts of sticks. Anything to try and push that branch down a bit. So now we're in the next season of growth. Over here, what's in dotted lines here represent the branches that were chosen to be cut out of this particular tree. Whoops, this one, and that one. So what they've done is you had a lot of branches around where you want to have your first scaffold limbs, and you're going to select 3 or 4 branches going in different directions so they encompass the whole base of the tree. Over here, we have 3 upright branches. This, and this. 3 different upright branches. Typically, what we want to do is take one that's most centered and the most vigorous branch. So the two branches with the dashed lines are cut out, and the branch that's selected is this one right here, which is a very strong branch. So up about 2 feet from that branch, what you would do is make a heading cut right here. So what that heading cut is going to do is that any vegetative buds that are below this, there's going to be several of them that will be promoted to break. And that will do is provide you branches that will form your next scaffold limbs. So And like I said, if you don't get breaks where you want, and there's particular buds there that you think would make good scaffold limbs, you could just, make a small cut in the bark above that bud to stop the flow of auxins to it, so that that vegetative bud could possibly break. Just make a little notch above the bud. So on the second year, again, what you're first going to do is remove your dead disease crossing branches. The previous year, you tried to induce branching, up 24 feet. So now we're like 2, 4, 6 feet up the tree, and we're getting our new scaffold limbs forming. So you remove your dead and diseased branches, just like you always do, first thing you do. Looking for crossing branches, try to do a little bit directional pruning so that you get the branch growing out in the direction you want it to. And again, you're going to start to train your next scaffold limbs. You may want to do some spreading on them also to try and make them grow at wide angles. Now here they're using clothespins. That works for a really young tree, but typically you're dealing with things, a little bit later where you have heavier wood. That wouldn't work. And then this is what can be used also, is just take like a 1x1 and cut it to a particular length, and you can put like a nail inside each end of it. So we have a 1x1 right here, a little stick, and you put nails on them, like finishing nails in it, and then you make a cut edge on that finishing nail on each side, and that can kind of rest inside the bark of the main trunk and the limb that you're trying to spread. And that, once you get that established, you take that out, and that'll peel over. So that's an inexpensive way of trying to do it yourself with spreaders. Okay, over here we see some hanging branches. These low hanging branches are not very good. They're not getting a lot of light. Anything that's hanging down, I would recommend cutting off. Over here, we've got a branch inside the canopy. I would cut that off. And then over here, we've got a lot of potential crossing of branches. So cuts are being made here and over it here. Again, to get rid of some of the excess growth so that you get good air circulation. You may even want to cut off this one so that the tree can dry out in between. Now, as the tree ages, they continue to accumulate spurs. And eventually there'll be so many spurs that the quality of the fruit gets really poor. It's not going to be good quality. They're going to be small in size, and it's going to reduce the good quality fruit that you have. So what you want to do is remove some of the older spurs, or at the very least, reduce the number of flower buds that are present on the spurs so they're not too heavily cropped. And you want to encourage the younger spurs to come on and develop. So I would start to remove some of the spurs so that you don't have such a heavy crop load every year. All right, so from here, we'll go to some video clips that show some actual pruning of fruit trees. Win Kogel, who former county agent in Hunterdon County, he did a lot of work with apples and peach trees there. So we're going to talk about first pruning of a small apple tree, and then we'll look upon pruning of a tree which is more mature in size and how you manage to kind of keep its size in control. And then what you do as trees get older and important branches may break out of the tree, what you can do. All right, so let's go to the videos now. So over here we have a young apple tree, and it looks almost like there's two competing leaders here, or a sucker came off of the rootstock. So chose one to make the leader. Prune out some of the lower branches. Now making selection of the scaffold limbs. And these are very nice angles coming off there. Looks like he's doing a heading cut there, prune more branching. Now, that last cut was to select one branch to be the leader.
I'm not going to let that tree go to be 20-foot tree, so I probably renew it to that side shoot.
Okay.
If you renew to a weak side shoot, you can take it down. See what I'm talking about? That
Which
weak
side
side
shoot?
shoot? The weak one going straight up there about.
That little skinny guy.
You got a leader there that says,
there.
I'd like to be your new leader. And I would make a nice saw cut on the big wood right above it.
Now, could you make that cut after?
An open center, you usually have 3 or 4 scaffolds. I actually like them to start them a little lower. And I actually have, for open center, I've got too many scaffolds in here, really.
How many scaffolds you like in
I like 3 to 5. I like 4 to 5, not 3. I like 4 to 5. This isn't a good tree to look at, though. The way we manage it is basically any real big uprights you just take out. But I basically just take out the upright shoots and any real weak and dead wood. And what we're going to do is take the big uprights out and try to open it up and get the big stuff done first. So I don't usually bring this tree down, but let's pretend I'm not doing that for right now. I don't want real big wood up here, so I'm going to do this.
Win, what's the role of stubs on this now?
Well, I don't really want stubs up in here. If I got a branch down low that's in the sun and I lost all my branches, I might leave a stub if there was one to leave. I'd throw a new shoot where I'm trying to replace. But you don't want stubs as a rule because that's where you can get cytosporic cankers.
No questions, anybody? Okay.
This is from Kelly. She said, February's over and I haven't yet pruned my nectarine tree. After it warms up like today, is it better to prune late, assuming dry weather, or should I just try again next year?
All right, I would definitely prune it this year. Typically, we wait to prune our trees until after the cold weather has passed, like it is now. We get into March. I think is a really good time to prune the trees. Because if you prune the trees like in February and maybe warm when you're doing the pruning, but then it gets really, really cold after you've done it, the pruning, that can cause like damage to the trees if it gets real cold after that. I don't think we're likely to have a lot of cold weather from here on in. So, it's better to prune the trees than to not prune the trees because there'll be way too much growth on them. You need to open the trees up. So I'd go ahead and prune them when you get the chance.
Okay, Kelly also has another question. Is it true that pruning too heavily can cause the more water sprout branches? Every year I prune a lot of them away and I get even more the next year. What is the solution?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question. Definitely too much pruning will lead to water sprouts. It's particularly a problem when there isn't a good set of fruit to help suppress the vigor of the tree. That's the problem when you're dealing with things like stone fruit. Some years, you have great flower buds that you think you're going to have a banner year, but then you wind up getting a late spring frost in the end of April, like we did last year. So there's no fruit on the tree. So what happens then is you may tend to get a lot of vegetative growth. So what we did at the farm last year, because we basically had no fruit whatsoever, is I had somebody go through the trees and remove the water sprouts as they were breaking to take them out. If you break them out of the tree before they really make a very strong vascular connection with the trunk of the tree, they're not likely to grow back. If you cut them out after they've matured a bit, they're much more likely to just break buds right next to it. But yeah, water sprouts, can be a problem once. If you prune too hard, you're going to be fighting them for years.
Jenny has a question. Is there a way to slow down growth of side branches if the main leader was broken in a pear tree, as in six side size shoots coming from just below the break?
Yeah, what I would recommend doing is if there's branches that you want to suppress the growth of them, if you were to take the new growth and kind of make it curve downward, that would reduce the vigor in that branch. So you could, and if you didn't do that to the branches that you want to make your new leader, of course, that would take off while those other branches would be suppressed. Managing pears is really challenging. They do have a tendency to want to send limbs. They're like want to make multiple leaders. Some farmers now are going to that sort of approach because pears tend to be so vigorous. They're just having like 3 or 4 leaders on the tree. But if you want to keep it to a single leader and try to do it to like a typical central leader system, that may be something you could try and do.
Ed has a question. How do you know how many spurs or flower buds to remove on older trees?
That's a tough one. If you find that the fruit size was small the previous years and the quality is going down, that's an indication that you're leaving too many flower buds on the tree. So if you're a little bit leery about moving the spurs in their entirety, which I understand, what you could just do is reduce the number of flower buds that they have on them, so it's not so heavy. And of course, you also have to look at the balance of what is your fruit bud set like on like a 2-year and 3-year-old growth. Because that tends to get a lot of sunlight too, depending upon what type of tree it is. So it depends. Like Red Delicious type trees, they can really overset with fruit, and you wind up getting fruit of not very good eating quality. So I rather have a smaller number of good quality fruit. Yeah.
Armando's got a question. What is the reason for the white trunk at the base of the tree?
That's a very good question. What happens during the winter time is the sun, can heat the bark up on the trunk during the daytime. And what will happen is it gets really cold at night. It can cause cracking to form on the trunk of the tree. So by painting the trunk white with latex paint, I might add, you don't want to use oil-based paint. What that does is it reflects the sunlight, so it doesn't have as much temperature fluctuation during the course of those bright sunny days that we can have in the middle of the winter, where you get quite a bit of heating taking place on a dark trunk. So it just reduces the splitting of trunks. That's a big problem on apricot trees. You tend to see a lot of it damaged. We used to paint ours, but we just don't have the people to do it today.
I know you're going to talk about figs, Joe, but Jenna's asking, can I prune my fig tree now as well?
Okay, that's a good question. I actually included something about figs.
Good.
What I do with figs, though, I'll answer it now. Like when I'm pruning my figs, I have this tendency to save the cuttings and root them. And I'm almost obsessive about it, I might add. They're easy to grow. I mean, I did really well with them until the squirrels discovered them. But in any case, if you save the cuttings, you can cut them really at any time. I usually cut them like in February or something, do some cuts on it, just because I want to, start to callus over those cuttings so I can root them in the spring. And in 1 year's within one season, I could get those rooted cuttings to be 5 feet tall and eat fruit off of them same year. All right, so what we're going to do is talk about peach and nectarine pruning. You got a little preview of that in the videos that we just saw. Peaches and nectarines are pruned typically to what's called an open center. And it can also be used with apricots and Japanese plums. Apricots, yeah, it's not so easy to train them to an open center. It depends on the variety. There's quite a bit of variation in how apricots grow. So open center is a real easy system for pruning trees. When you get a plant from a nursery, maybe, a couple feet tall or so. And what you want to do is, have branches about 24 inches to 30 inches from the ground that will be your scaffold limbs. And like I said, I typically may leave 4 or 5 scaffold limbs initially, just thinking that some are going to get rubbed by a deer or or not be all that strong. And then later I'll just select it to maybe 4, and then maybe try to keep the 4 until one may look like it needs to take it out and thin it out. So if you get your tree the first year, it may just be a simple stick that you get as a peach tree. If it's more than 30 inches tall, what I would do is top it, just do a heading cut, and that will promote branches to form. So in this case, we've got, after trimming this tree, they basically made a cut right here in it. So they now have what could be 3 scaffold limbs for the open center, the basic framework of that tree. So now during that growing season, I would encourage you, like in August or so, is to go through and do a little bit of summer pruning. Start to train the tree so that it's putting its energy going outward from the trunk of the tree. In this case, a couple more vegetative buds broke below where you want them to be. So these are being cut off here and here. There could be some inner growth in here that you may not want to have, which is close to the trunk. It's going to be growing near the trunk. So any growth here, I would not want to have. I want to keep that opened up if I see anything along in here. So I keep that clean of growth. And then, so we've got our 2 scaffold limbs here, and then we've got a third one coming off in this direction here. And it looks like there's a little one here. You could, if that's going off, like, leaves enough space, maybe you want to keep that there as a backup scaffold limb if something goes wrong on the 3 that you've chosen already. So I may leave that and then prune it off the following, spring if I see it, wasn't necessary. So during spring of the next year, around this time of year is when we typically do our pruning. Is what you're going to do is just a lot of minor sorts of cuts right here. Again, we're going to make a cut here and here, get rid of these inner branches because we want the leaves to be branches to be going out in this direction. If you see some things that are going to, like, definitely would cut this branch off here, this here, and this one here is growing towards this branch. So you want to make sure that they're kind of going in, different directions. So you do a little bit of directional pruning. You're going to try and get this branch going out and away from the branch over here. So we have this branch. We can't really do much with this, but this branch we could do a directional pruning. And what we could do is maybe cut this off here and cut that off. Whoops, change colors. Right there. And leave this branch that's here growing out in this direction. You want to get it growing away from that. So try and get this one growing more this way and this one growing more this way. And again, any sort of disease branches you want to cut out right away. All right, so figs. I don't know any of you if you've tried growing figs, but I'm a big fan of them because you can just grow them in a container, or you can grow them in the ground, or you can grow them in containers and in ground. The one person had the question if they have a 10-year-old fig. My guess is they're growing it in the ground and they're wrapping it up each year. You could probably grow them in a container too. I probably have one that's in a container for easily 6-7 years now. It's a brown turkey, I believe it's the variety that I have. But yeah, I grow mine in like 2-gallon containers. I try to keep them to a single stem with branches coming off of them. If you do grow them in the ground, like I said, you need to wrap them. As you can see, they're wrapped here. If you grow them in a pot, what I do is I keep them in my garage, which is attached, which stays relatively cold but doesn't get too cold. You can go below freezing in there. The trees will be fine. You just don't want to get too cold in there. And I just leave them in there. They get their chilling in the garage. And then come March, they'll begin to come out of dormancy. I try to delay it as much as I can. Keep the cold air in my garage if I can. If it's really hot in there, though, I'll open up the garage doors and let in some cooler air. And once they begin to break dormancy, I try to keep them close to the garage because I may need to move them in on cold nights. They typically ripen fruit for me in like the middle of August or early September. And that's of the crop of figs that are forming on the current growth. I tend to like that main crop figs that are produced because they tend to be higher in sugars because of all those, the summer growing degree hours. They tend to get very, very sweet. Now, some of the fig varieties have a Breber crop, which is produced on the tips of the previous season's growth. Brown turkey does do that to some degree. And then there's a secondary crop which forms in the summer, and that's occurring on the current growth. And that's much, much, much larger than the Breber crop, at least in my experience. I think I may lose a lot of the flower buds that were from last year's growth because of frost events that occur in the spring. Because have some figs and sometimes they get frozen off on me. That second crop is quite large. And I've grown a range of different varieties. As I said, I have much more success with the main crop than I do the Breber crop for me. The nice thing about figs is that they'll grow on current season growth. So over here is what's pictured here in the lighter green is the current season growth. And every leaf axil a fig develops. So what they have is over here are the main crop, and then over here we have like Breber crop there on the older season wood. And then another fruit tree that you maybe want to consider growing, which is relatively easy to care for here in New Jersey, is the American persimmons. There are some named varieties of American persimmons. We planted a few at the Rutgers Fruit and Ornamental Research and Extension Center. They just started to come into bearing last year. The deer ate all of the fruit before I got to try any of them. But they did set last year very well. Some of the Native American persimmons are said to be self-fruitful, but they probably benefit by getting fertilization from male plants, because American persimmons are generally dioecious, but there are some varieties out there that are said to be self-fruitful. The American persimmons, unlike the Japanese persimmons, are much smaller, 1 to 2 fruit, 2 inches in diameter. And the one thing, if you've ever had an American persimmon, they may look beautiful, but they're very astringent until they get really overripe. And after a freeze, that can remove that astringency. But it has a nice flavor. And if you want to attract deer in your yard, The deer absolutely love American persimmons. So I have a clump of them in the woods, and the deer go there every single day when the fruit begins to ripen and gather what has fallen during the previous night. It's a nice fruit tree to grow, and like the fig tree, they set their fruit on current season growth, so that makes it easy also. Now, I can't say I've done any pruning with my trees. Mine are just native American persimmons that were in the woods, and I just keep them there. You know, I haven't really done anything with them. They set up with fruit every year for me. This is a variety that we released for ornamental use and fruit. This is it's called Flat Wonderful, sold by Gurney's. Previously it was called H28-52. It's a red leaf donut peach. So it produces flat peaches, which are over here. They're called donut peaches because they're flat and sunken in the middle. It has excellent fruit quality. I don't know if any of you have eaten, Cannon Clingstone peaches. They have like a spicy, sweet flavor to it. That's what this texture of this is. It has a non-melting flesh. It has red leaves in the early spring. This is not pruned like you would want to prune it to an open center. This is pruned to just make a pretty looking tree. It looks beautiful in bloom, as you can see over here. The flowers are large and quite showy and pink in color. And this is like in summer. You can see the grass is well greened up, and it still has retained its red foliage. And you have the benefit of having something to eat afterwards too. But you do need to maintain sprays on it to keep insects from eating the fruit and keep diseases off the fruit. I don't know if we have time for any more questions. I'd be glad to take any questions.
Sure. Joe, first, before we get to those, this donut peach is out and about, right? Growers have this now?
Yeah, Gurney's. Yeah, the fruit trees that we've been marketing to homeowners, we've been going through Gurney's nursery. So
Okay.
there's some of our scab-resistant apples are available there. There are a couple of apricots that are available from Gurney's nursery too.
And how about growers in New Jersey have been growing the donut peaches? Are many of those your varieties?
The donut peaches, if you see them in New Jersey, chances are there are varieties. I would.
They have amazing flavor. I just want to tell you that John Hauser and others, Von Toons and all grow those, and they are just absolutely amazing flavor.
That's the all yellow one?
Yes.
Yeah, that's NJF16 is what it's called.
Oh, okay.
Oh wait, that's the named variety of it. It's marketed under Tangos. The name
Tangos? Oh, okay.
That's a trade.
Now it's good to know.
Yeah.
Because I know that people will specifically come to our fair every year and they want to get those donut peaches. They're just crazy about those.
We set out to make something that would be unique from other donut peaches that were out there. And I wanted to make it just very different. So I made a cross that I thought may give me something that would be all yellow and flat. And we got it in the first cross.
Great. Armando is asking, do you need to put something at the end of the cut for it to cure, or I guess to heal easier, to prevent rot?
When we make our cuts, it's a very good question. I'm glad you asked that. I don't want to be pruning the trees when it's raining or rain is anticipated. You got to be careful when you're pruning apple trees with fire blight that can get in. So the answer is we don't do anything after we've done the cuts, but we try to time our pruning so that we're not opening ourselves up to potential disease problems. One thing I didn't get into that I would have gotten into if we had more time is how rootstock can be used to really determine how much pruning you need to do. There are some dwarfing rootstocks out there that will really minimize the amount of pruning that you need to do. So like when you're buying if you're interested in growing apples, there's wonderful dwarfing rootstocks on apples, and there's some good ones also on cherries too. Peaches, there's nothing really that works well to have a dramatic dwarfing effect on peaches or nectarines.
And then the question is, how long can you keep a fig in a 2-gallon pot? Do you ever need to repot that into a larger?
I haven't been, and they keep making figs each year.
Okay.
But I tell you, the watering is getting harder and harder.
Another question here is, when you keep figs in the garage, do you need to water in winter? If so, how often?
In the past, I would just occasionally give them a little bit of water. I mean, they're basically dormant. I put them into the garage when they're well saturated after the rain. I leave them out, until they're forecasting, temperatures around 20 at night. That's when I bring them inside.
Well, Joe, thank you for answering the questions that we were able to get to today. We greatly appreciate you sharing your expertise and time with everyone. We want you to share your success stories with us. If any information that we've shared with you has helped you in your garden, please send us a photograph and a few sentences, just letting us know how we've been able to help you.
And always remember to reach out to your local master gardeners. And if you can join your local master gardener, your county master gardener group, it's a wonderful way to get new information and provide outreach to your community. So a lot of great opportunities there. So reach out to your local cooperative extension office. Take care, everybody.